pounds on me, so I got that fire on me. In the desert heat, I'm burning marijuana, trying to fill bags with green and blue cheese. In the city, the only thing that matters is the money, and that's the only thing I want, honey. I live the life that's crummy, so I want my gold like a day sunny. Once upon a time.
Hey, this is Bird Rabbit, and this is the MITRA Blue episode series. For today's episode, we are going to be doing the book read. Which book? We are going to be doing Continuing Black Indians, A Hidden Heritage. Where did I leave off at? I left somewhere around the 5th chapter. So let me find that marker right around here. And we can get it started. Alright, here we go. Alright. So, we left off probably around the 4th chapter, I don't know. But let's just continue. The 44th page. Maroon governments and leaders. Maroon settlements were an effort to recreate a free society by people who had once lived free. Before the 1700s, most Maroons leaders were like their followers, African-born. Some of these colonies built dynasties on African models that lasted for generations and had royal courts, cabinets, princesses, and princesses. By the beginning of the 18th century, Maroon figures were cut from a different mold. They were born in the Americas, often of black Indian stock. Their skills were in dealing with Europeans in battle at the negotiating table. They preferred to be known as governor and commander rather than king or queen. Most leaders still had a familiarity with African tradition and customs. Women played a crucial role in Maroon life when were considered for leadership. Philippa Maria Aranja, an African, ruled a thriving colony in the Amazonian Brazil. Her daring forays against the Portuguese army sent against her village not only defeated them, but convinced the enemy it was wiser to negotiate than try to defeat her. At the bargaining table, Aranja won her people's liberty and sovereignty. In Pasanha, Brazil, the Portuguese discovered Malali Indians and Africans living under the rule of another African woman. Leading a Maroon colony took a rare combination of wisdom, toughness, and skill. The ruler had to provide for a strong defense, keep spirit high despite threats, and developed a rich and satisfying economic life for members. Courts or other means of administrating justice had to be in a place considered fair. Because of the threat from outside, enforcement of rule was often harsh and swift on vital matters such as murder, robbery, adultery, or desertion. The punishment was death, often in public. Since women were outnumbered by men in Maroon settlements, women were not only protected, but sometimes permitted to have more than one husband. God damn. But sometimes permitted to have more than one husband. This arrangement was carried out under careful rules that kept jealousy from disrupting village life. In this, as in all other matters, preserving unity and providing a strong defense came first. These settlements also protected the young and the elderly with special care, since the former represented the future and the latter represented gallant tradition and valuable knowledge. Maroon leaders were first and foremost military figures. For over 4 centuries in Latin America, European armed forces waged a war to death against them. Captain John Stedman, a British officer in charge of Dutch troops in Guyana at the time of the American Revolution, left a record of his Maroon campaigns. He told how his troops, which included Europeans and Indians, destroyed the most beautiful field of ripe rice and left a village of 100 homes in smoking ruins. Captain Stedman and his 80 Marines and 20 Rangers enjoyed their devastation, and he proudly wrote of the continued noise of firing, shouting, and swearing, hollowing of black and white men mixed together, the groans of the wounded and dying, all weltering in blood and dust. To delay or defeat these well-armed soldiers, Maroons had to devise careful and unique strategies. In one battle, Stedman's men all suffered wounds from Maroon musket fire, but realized they had only minor injuries. Instead of bullets embedded in their flesh, the found pebbles, coat buttons, and pieces of silver coins, these Maroons had no bullets. On the night after the battle, Stedman's troops found themselves in the midst of a shouting match with their Maroon foes. All-night voices from the woods hurled curse and ridicule at the invaders, and the Europeans shouted back their fury at being kept awake. The next morning, Stedman's soldiers discovered that under the cover that noise, the Maroons had moved out their women, children, and the elderly, their rice, yams, and other possessions. The captain thought this tactic would have done honor to any European commander. By the time Captain Stedman and his soldiers left for Holland in 1776, the Maroon forces had grown from 3,000 to 15,000. 70 years later, they were 70 years later, they were 70,000 strong. Nice. That's what's up, man. Strong and enjoying their liberty, prosperity, and independence. To defeat them, Captain Stedman had rallied and conscripted Indian and slave soldiers. This became a common European practice. These troops proved to be just best jungle fighters, These troops proved to be the best jungle fighters the Europeans had. They also were the least reliable, the most likely to defeat the people they were sent off to destroy. Let's read that one over. They also were the least reliable, the most likely to defeat the people they were sent off to destroy. European soldiers and officers rarely relished marching into the wilderness to face seasoned jungle fighters, so they continued to conscript, bribe, or hire Native Americans and Africans. The Republic of Palmares. For almost a century, a Maroon colony called the Republic of Palmares in northeastern Brazil stood as the greatest challenge to European rule in Latin America. It began around 1600 with a few African slave runaway and friendly Indians. In 1640, a Dutch citizen named Lentz reported 11,000 people living in Palmares, 3 villages. The Dutch West India Company decided to put Palmares through fire and sword. They tried again a few years later, also without success. By then, Palmares was half a mile long, with streets 6 feet wide, and had hundreds of homes, churches, and shops. It was well-kept land, produced cereal and all others crops, irrigated African style with streams. It boasted courts that carried out justice for its thousands of citizens, and was ruled over by King Ganga Zamba. Ganga Zamba combined an Anglo and African word for great with a Tupi Indian word for ruler. Christianity was commonly practiced, including elaborated marriage by baptism ceremonies that drew large crowds. In 1657, life in Palmares was still relatively peaceful, But the new rulers of Brazil, the Portuguese, decided it must be destroyed. A foreign expedition was launched about every 15 months to obliterate obliterate. So let's read that over. A foreign expedition was launched about every 15 months to obliterate the Republic of Palmares, and each was beaten back with heavy losses on both sides. Palmares, its determined armed forces, and 3 huge surrounding walls cost many a foreign commander or governor his post of his life. Men in splendid uniforms turned and fled back to Rio de Janeiro, or Lisbon, relieved to abandon a war they couldn't win. A 17th century Portuguese soldier wrote of these failures: the army's best fighters, the most experienced leaders, were at once employed for this purpose. This immense effort and suffering, but very little was achieved. Finally, in 1694, the invaders brought an army of Brazilian Indians called Politis. Finally, in 1694, invaders brought an army of Brazilian Indians called Paulistas to lead the massive assault on the Republic of Palmares. 6,000 Paulistas, supported by Portuguese soldiers and weapons, laid siege to Palmares for 42 days. On February 5th, it was overrun with hundreds dying in hand-to-hand combat. Other hundreds, including Palmares' bravest warriors, according to a legend, hurled themselves over a cliff rather than surrender. That sucks. Hurled themselves over a cliff rather than surrender. The ruler, King Zambe, who had been wounded in the struggle, was captured and beheaded by the enemy. His head was displayed, said the European victors, to kill the legends of his immortality. But death does not kill legends. For almost a century, the Republic of Palmares had shone as the brightest star of freedom in Latin America. It had united many people under an African form of government and culture for generations. Hold on. This is a picture. Let me get the fuck out the fucking way. Let me see if y'all know this. Alright, let me explain the picture. After almost a century of freedom, the Republic of Palmares was overthrown in 1694 of Portuguese forces and their Native American allies. So this is a drawing of that war. Nice. Some Africans fighting some Europeans, some African natives. Native American mix, Maroons fighting some European, Portuguese colonized Brazil. So the slaves mixed with the Indians and governed themselves, and they, I guess, waged a war, and it was war, you know what I'm saying? Because, Europeans back into those Portuguese. Yes. So let's continue. Yeah. For generations, it had turned around European invaders and their hired mercenaries. Each time it had returned to planting and harvesting abundant crops. The meaning of Palmares and its legendary rulers was that people of color in the Western Hemisphere meant to be free. This idea terrified Europeans more than the powerful armies and defense of Palmares. Bum, bum, bum. All right, now let's continue. The president of Mexico. In 1615, King Philip II of Spain received a letter from his Mexican colony advising him that division of the races is an indispensable element in controlling his colonies. But the people of color had also learned that reverse was true, that their best road to success in resisting foreign domination was to unite. This became clear during the crucial war for independence Mexico fought against Spain early in the 19th century. Not only did Mexico's Maroon experience prepare its mixed races to march to independence, but it cast up a leader in Vincent Guerrero, a black Indian, born in Ixtala in 1782. Guerrero's parents were of mixed European, Indian, and African stock. As a young man, Guerrero became a mule driver, and in 1810, he was one of the first to enlist in the War for Independence. In his first battle, he was commissioned a captain as the conflict dragged on for years. Conflict dragged on for years. The leading revolutionaries died or were captured, but with 2,000 ragmen carrying guns and ammunition taken from the fallen Spanish soldiers, Guerrero kept the spark of rebellion alive in the Sierra Madre Mountains. Repeatedly, Spanish officials tried to persuade the charismatic young man to surrender and return home. They even sent his father to ask him to accept a pardon. Guerrero fought on. By 1821, the independence movement was headed toward success. Guerrero's swarthy face, resonant voice. They're boasting this guy up. His swarthy face, resonant voice, and flashy eyes made him an object of profound respect, even among his enemies, reported U.S. historian H. Bancroft in 1824. Guerrero, who had only learned to read a few years before, when he was 40, helped shape the Mexican Constitution, He wrote the provision all inhabitants, whether white, African, or Indian, are qualified to hold office. In 1829, the former mule driver became president of Mexico. He began a program of far-reaching reforms, abolishing the death and penalties, starting construction of schools and libraries for the poor. He ended slavery in Mexico. Yet, because of his skin color, lack of education, and country manner, he was held in contempt by the upper classes in Mexico City. This president, who had, according to Bancroft, a gentleness and magnetism that inspired love among his adherents, was still a triple-blooded outsider. God damn. They called him a triple-blooded outsider. That is crazy. What was he mixed with? Whites, African, or Indian. That's what that means. Man. Gruesome. Black historian J.A. Rogers summarized Guerrero's striking accomplishments by calling him the George Washington and Abraham Lincoln of Mexico. That is what's up. Alrighty. So, I'll leave it off right there, because it goes on to Chapter 4. So, the finest looking people I've ever seen. What a compliment. What a compliment. And we'll leave off right there. Yeah, we'll leave off right there. No. And we'll go into Seminoles on the next chapter. The Seminole War. We'll leave that up for the next chapter. Alright, so this is Burr Rabbit, and I hope you enjoyed that show. Well, this book read. So, have a good one, and thank you.